So when I was a little girl, there was a moment where I believed that I could fly. And like most children who are heavily under the influence of the fictions that surround their world, I thought, if Mary Poppins could do it, then why couldn't I? And I tried, while holding an umbrella and jumping off the roof of my mother's minivan. Needless to say, I had a pretty active imagination. And thankfully, I had a mother who encouraged me to explore those various flights of fancy. And I am thankful for those moments because all of that has led to this moment. And what I would like to talk to you about today is far from fiction. Because I believe that I can change our future. Now, you might be asking, what do I know about the future when, let's be honest, I barely have a past? So for the last few years, I have had the privilege of working with someone who I consider to be one of my mentors, Chris Lupkeman. And Chris established what is now known as the Foresight, Research, and Innovation team at the engineering firm Arup over a decade ago. Arup has been around for over 50 years, and you've probably seen a few of our buildings around, including the Sydney Opera House and the Bird's Nest in Beijing. So I spend my days as a foresight and innovation consultant. And what this really means is that I work to engage people in meaningful conversations about change, and then distill what that change looks like and how we might adapt to it or mitigate it. But I didn't start in futures. About 10 years ago, in August of 2005, I was gearing up to start my first year of architecture school at Tulane University. I was eager to set up my dorm room and meet my stereotypically bubbly new resident advisor, and then head to the architecture building later that afternoon for an orientation. But we never made it to that orientation. Because by 3 p.m. that afternoon, Tulane University had essentially shut down. And the next morning, at 4 a.m., I found myself with my family in 2 cars on our way to Houston, Texas. And after a 15-hour drive to Houston, we arrived later that evening to find that Hurricane Katrina had made landfall along the Gulf Coast. I believe we all know what happened after that. So Tulane finally opened its doors again that following January. And in that first year, my days and nights were spent hunched over a drawing board, and my weekends were spent gutting houses down to their studs. And with each studio project and each house, I had more and more questions swirling around in my mind. Driving around a neighborhood one afternoon, I was literally stopped in my path by a house that had been lifted off of its foundation and placed in the middle of the road. How many people in the audience here know of an architect? So for those of you who raised your hands, you probably think we do this, this, and even a little bit of this every once in a while. The girl, that's me, yeah. But what if I told you that what we actually do is to create future artifacts? So your house, maybe the airport you flew into this week, even this beautiful venue that we're all sitting in today, they all came about as a sketch, as an idea, yes. But more importantly, these structures are standing here today because a group of designers, engineers, citizens, developers, they all felt that these were the best possible solutions at that time to a design problem. And design problems are questions that arise from our future needs and expectations. So what do those begin to look like? Maybe it's something like, how can we create a safe, affordable, and comfortable space for a young family as it grows? This project by Colin Van Wingen, who now runs GOATstudio, is an example of what a response might manifest as. By the way, Colin's a Grand Rapids native, so I'm hoping I get some points for that. So the solution emerges through a hands-on exploration of conditions which we cannot be certain of, but must acknowledge. The GOAT team had to consider the design of a structure that would not only expand as the family grew, but one that would withstand elements such as storms, flooding, extreme heat and humidity, termite swarms, and other threats common to Southeast Louisiana. The tangible outcome, in this case the building, becomes a successful response to a future condition. Now, if this tangible process of exploration worked for architectural futures, could the same process be applied to all questions about the future? And like architecture, where the outcome of the exploration is actually implemented, would a similar process catalyze direct action? So the future is overwhelming. And there's this great quote from Invisible Monsters that reads, "When did the future switch from being a promise to being a threat?" The UN expects that 21% of the global population, that's more than 2 billion people, will be 60 years or older by the year 2050. This is compared to the 12% in 2013. So a growing aging population, what does this mean for our healthcare system, for our urban mobility networks? From a technological standpoint, a recent study has shown that 99.4% of the objects that will one day be connected as part of the Internet of Things have yet to be connected. What will an emerging generation of digital natives come to expect from the environments that they encounter? And have we really reached our privacy threshold? The European Environmental Agency predicts that by 2100, sea levels will be on average 10.2 to 31.8 inches higher than they are today. So this, coupled with the severity and frequency of natural disasters, what does this mean for our aging infrastructure and even our new developments? It's a lot to think about. And each of you, you're just one person. There is no way that you, as one person, has the answers to this future. So the future is overwhelming when we think about the global scale. But what happens when we scale those immense global questions down to a local context? Now, I wanted to leave you with 2 stories this morning. And the first one is about the Holistic Environment Response Division, also known as HERD. And HERD carries out projects that address future scenarios. Now, when I first found out about their mission, I was truly inspired because what they do is to collaborate with designers all over the world to create future artifacts. The hope is that by enabling users to actively engage in future speculations at the personal, human scale, tangible solutions can be generated and implemented. Now, a couple years back, I met one of the designers. She was an architect turned jewelry designer by the name of Ana Borja. And at the time, she was based in Florence. And she was very, very passionate about this issue of animal swarming. So in the coming years, rapid declines in biodiversity would essentially lead to swarming incidents amongst insects and birds, or that was her belief. Now, having done her research, Anna believed that in the future, swarming behavior would leave cities like New York periodically devoid of tourists, and citizens would have to wear these protective pod-like suits when stepping out. But she was concerned about her local city. How would they cope? Because you see, in Florence, the streets are very narrow, and those protective pod suits that worked so well in New York would be difficult to adapt. So, being a jewelry designer, she designed a gender-neutral system of body adornment that not only enhanced the human form, but served to ward off swarms through movement, sound, and reflection. So I just want to let you all know that it's okay to laugh a little here, because HERD isn't real. I told you I have an active imagination. It's a fictitious entity that I established a couple years back to test out some of my ideas about designing for the future. Anna doesn't believe in animal swarming, but she truly is a gifted jewelry designer. Now, this scenario and the outcome is absurd. I do not deny that at all. But let's remember what I was really trying to do here was develop a process. When we took those overwhelming, intangible, global drivers, in this case, shifting weather patterns and global animal swarming, I noticed that all of the designers were able to implement future solutions once they made those issues personal. During one of our meetings, Anna asked, "During this strange situation, how will I keep being what I am?" And I thought, the only thing we can look at is the past and the present. Take what we have now and use it. The things that won't change so easily. The things that are embedded in the culture. So this was really about emotional engagement. And it was built on the notion that innovation can be cultivated through direct action. But I believe that to truly have an impact on the future, we cannot make it about designers exclusively. To change the future, we need to make it real and make it personal for everyone. So my last story is about getting personal in Lisbon. And we were curious about this question. So we have this large global driver. Resource constraints coupled with shifting weather patterns brings us to no more fish in the sea. Now we chose to curate an immersive experience using a vehicle that was personally relatable. And we reinterpreted the stone soup folktale, which originated in Portugal, from what I've learned, and is now known known there as La Sopa de Pedra. So we asked, what would recontextualizing the ritual of cooking through the story bring to light for us? For those of you who may not be so familiar with the tale, the sweet moral of the story is that by working together with everyone contributing what little they can, a greater good is achieved. So we took this and we made it our own. We baked vegetables in edible clay made to look like stones. And over the course of the day, curious passersby were asked to unearth a stone and contribute whatever vegetable was inside. And while the soup cooked, we asked participants to answer one question. What is your favorite seafood dish and why? So why was this important? We were working in an area where the community had a different seafood dish for almost every day of the year. Now, if we take this global issue of shifting weather patterns and pollution and resource constraints, all resulting in no more fish in the sea, we're back at our overwhelming future. But let's make it local. Let's imagine that each member of the community could no longer go to their market and pick up a fish to cook for their families. So we're getting closer. But in the future, if I'm not asking for too much, we might have a safe, cost-effective, healthy protein alternative. So it's not like people would starve. Now let's make it personal. It's not about the Dead Seas. It's not even about having a fish to cook. What happens during the cooking of the meal? If we go back to that question about each individual's favorite recipe, why did they recall it as their favorite? It was the stories that were associated with the preparation and the eating of that dish. So what we came to find was that we destroy our oceans, we kill our fish. What we're actually doing is taking away the opportunity for cultural exchange. Once you took away that ritual of cooking that dish, the cultural transfer of family history, of life lessons, of hopes for future generations, all of that disappears with it. Now, I know that's pretty bleak. And sometimes the way we see the future is. But here's something to consider. The wonderful thing about the future is that it hasn't happened yet. Which means we still have time to change it. So the future is overwhelming. But I'm not here to talk to you about making big things happen. What I'm asking you is to take those big things, make them local, make them personal, and make them tangible. One of my favorite quotes is by Buckminster Fuller, and it says, "We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims." In our present times, we expect everything to be personal, to be curated for the individual, to be about me, to be about you. I think it's time to make the future personal. So what's the next smallest thing that each of you can do? Because let's be honest, it's really about you. Thank you.